He was 18, finally aged out of the system. All he and his sister had was a derelict farm and a key. What they found there wasn't an inheritance. It was a choice that would define the rest of their lives. If you've ever felt like your story was written for you by someone else, stick around. This one might feel familiar. And if it does, I hope you'll subscribe, because this is a place for stories like ours. The last day felt like every other day, until it wasn't. The clock on the wall of the common room at St. Jude's Home for Children ticked with the same hollow, institutional sound it always had. It was a sound that had measured out the last decade of my life in evenly spaced, meaningless increments. 2 years of waiting after Mom died. 8 years of growing up in a system that felt like a long gray hallway with no doors. On my 18th birthday, a door finally appeared. It didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like an eviction. My sister Maya sat next to me on the cracked vinyl sofa, her leg bouncing with a nervous energy that vibrated right through me. She was 16, and because I was now technically an adult, she was my responsibility. The state saw it as a neat and tidy solution. 2 orphans, 1 file, closed. Ms. Albright, our caseworker for as long as I could remember, sat across from us behind a large, scarred wooden desk. She had a kind face, but it was the kind of kindness that had been worn smooth by years of bureaucratic friction. She slid a thick manila envelope across the desk. It made a dry, rasping sound. "Leo, Maya," she said, her voice gentle but firm, the same tone she used for every difficult conversation. "This is it. Everything is in here." I stared at the envelope. It looked heavy, impossibly heavy. Inside was the deed to a piece of land, a small farm in a town called Havenwood, 3 hours north. It had belonged to our grandmother, our last living relative, who had passed away 2 years ago while we were already deep in the system. We'd never even been told she was sick. The notification of her death and the existence of the farm had come as a bureaucratic footnote in our yearly review. "The property taxes are 3 years in arrears," Ms. Albright continued, pulling out a separate, thinner file. "You'll need to arrange a payment plan with the county clerk's office almost immediately. There's also a standing offer on the property from a developer, Stone Ridge Estates. It's a generous offer, Leo. Enough to get you and Maya a decent apartment in the city, set you both up for a couple of years." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine for any sign of comprehension. "It might be the smartest move. The property. It hasn't been maintained." I nodded, but I wasn't really listening. I was thinking about a woman I barely remembered. Grandma Ilara. I had vague, sun-drenched memories of her hands, wrinkled and smelling of soil and chamomile. I remembered her telling me stories about the constellations, her voice a low hum against the sound of crickets. Then, one day, she was just gone from our lives. Mom never talked about her. It was a closed door, a locked room in our family's history. And now, all that was left of her was a debt and a developer's offer. "There are 2 keys in the small envelope," Ms. Albright said, tapping a finger on it. "One is for the front door. The other, the estate lawyer said your grandmother was very specific about it. He said it was for the heart of the house." I picked up the small, lumpy envelope. I could feel the distinct shapes of 2 old iron keys through the paper. The heart of the house. It sounded like something from one of her stories. Maya shifted beside me. "Can we just go?" she whispered. Her voice was brittle. She hated these meetings, hated the feeling of our lives being discussed like a business transaction. I put the large envelope in my worn backpack, which held everything I owned. 3 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book I'd read a dozen times, and a faded photograph of our mom. Now it also held a farm. Our farm. I stood up, the legs of the chair scraping against the linoleum. "Thank you, Ms. Albright, for everything." The words felt hollow, a formality. She gave me a small, sad smile. "Good luck, Leo. You're a good man. You'll figure it out." I wasn't a man. I was a kid with another kid to look after, and a ghost of a grandmother had just handed us a pile of problems. I took Maya's hand. Her fingers were cold. We walked down the long gray hallway for the last time, the sound of the ticking clock fading behind us until it was gone completely. The silence that replaced it was terrifying. It was the sound of a future that was entirely, brutally our own. The bus ride was a study in contrasts. Inside, the air was stale and recirculated, smelling faintly of diesel and disinfectant. Outside, the world rushed by in a blur of vibrant, almost violent green. We'd spent our whole lives in the city, in the muted grays and browns of concrete and brick. As we traveled north, the buildings thinned out, replaced by sprawling fields and dense clusters of trees that crowded the edges of the highway. The skies seemed to get bigger, wider, a vast expanse of pale blue that made me feel impossibly small. Maya had her headphones on, her eyes closed, shutting out the world. I couldn't do that. I felt like I had to watch every mile, as if looking away would make our destination disappear. I traced the condensation on the window with my finger, my mind a chaotic swirl of numbers. Property taxes, the developer's offer, the meager amount of cash in my pocket that was meant to last us until we figured it out. I kept thinking about Grandma Ilara. Why hadn't she taken us in when Mom died? Why leave us a farm she must have known we couldn't manage? It felt less like a gift and more like a final, confusing puzzle. Abandonment had a certain simple, brutal logic to it. This was something else, something I couldn't parse. It felt like a riddle whispered from the grave, and I was too tired to even begin to solve it. The bus pulled into Havenwood just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the single main street. The town was small, the kind of place where the signs on the storefronts were faded and the paint was peeling. An old man sitting on a bench outside a general store tipped his hat to us as we stepped off the bus. It was such a simple, unexpected gesture of welcome that it felt alien. At St. Jude's, you learn to keep your head down, to not draw attention. Here, it seemed like our mere presence was an event. The air smelled different. It was clean and sharp, with the scent of damp earth, pine needles, and something else, something floral and sweet. It was the smell I vaguely associated with my grandmother's hands. The farm was a 2-mile walk from the bus stop. Ms. Albright had given us a hand-drawn map. As we walked, the houses grew farther apart, the silence broken only by the crunch of our sneakers on the gravel shoulder of the road and the chirping of insects tuning up for their nightly performance. My backpack felt heavier with every step. Maya was quiet, walking a few paces behind me. I knew she was scared. I was too. But I was the older brother. It was my job to pretend I wasn't. We saw it from a distance, just as the last light was draining from the sky. A silhouette of a farmhouse and a barn against a bruised purple horizon. The driveway was overgrown with weeds that clawed at our jeans as we walked up it. The house was a 2-story wooden structure that had once been white, but was now a patchwork of gray, weathered wood and peeling paint. The porch sagged on one side like a person slumping in exhaustion. A single shutter hung crookedly from an upstairs window, a broken wing. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a memory that had been left out in the rain for too long. "Leo," Maya said, her voice small, "it's broken." "We can fix it," I said, the words tasting like a lie in my mouth. I didn't know how to fix a leaky faucet, let alone a whole house. But it was what I had to say. I pulled the small envelope from my pocket and took out the keys. The first one was large and ornate, made of dark, rusted iron. It fit the lock on the front door. The lock was stiff, and I had to put my shoulder into it, but finally, with a groan of protest from the wood and a loud clunk, the door swung inward into a gulf of darkness. The air that rushed out was thick and musty, the smell of trapped time, dust, and decay. It smelled of secrets. It smelled of abandonment. We stood there on the threshold, two kids who had inherited a ghost. I took a deep breath, flipped a switch by the door that did nothing, and stepped inside. The inside of the house was a time capsule. Everything was covered in a thick, uniform layer of gray dust, but underneath it, life was frozen in place. In the living room, a teacup sat on a saucer next to an armchair, as if someone had just stepped out for a moment. A book lay open on a small table, its pages warped by humidity. The furniture was simple, sturdy, and well-made, shrouded now in white cloths like sleeping ghosts. It was eerie walking through the silent rooms. Each creak of the floorboards under my feet sounded like a gunshot in the profound quiet. We moved from the living room to the kitchen. Jars of what might have once been preserves lined a shelf, their contents dark and unrecognizable. A calendar on the wall was turned to August, 2 years ago, the last month of our grandmother's life. Maya opened a cupboard, and a mouse scurried out, making her jump back with a small shriek. I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, and, underneath it, a deep, weary disappointment. This wasn't the fresh start she'd been hoping for. This was just a different kind of institution, a bigger, emptier, more broken one. "I'm going to check upstairs," I said, needing to put some space between us, needing to escape the suffocating sadness of the ground floor. The stairs groaned under my weight. The second floor had 2 small bedrooms and a bathroom. One bedroom was clearly our grandmother's. A simple quilt was folded neatly on the bed. A collection of smooth gray stones was lined up on the windowsill. The other bedroom was empty, except for 2 small, child-sized beds. They were both made, waiting for occupants who never arrived. A chill went down my spine. Were these for us? Had she been waiting for us? The thought was more unsettling than the idea of her abandoning us. It made the story more complicated. At the end of the narrow hallway was a pull cord hanging from the ceiling. The attic. I pulled it, and a set of rickety wooden stairs unfolded with a dusty sigh. I climbed up, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The air in the attic was hot and still, thick with the smell of old wood, dried herbs, and something else. Mothballs. The roof was low and angled, with a single grimy circular window at one end that let in a sliver of moonlight. The floor was covered in cardboard boxes, old trunks, and furniture draped in white sheets. It was a graveyard of possessions. I started walking through the clutter, running my hand over the dusty surfaces. And that's when I saw it. In the far corner, behind a stack of old National Geographic magazines, was a section of the wall that didn't quite match. The wooden planks were a slightly different color, the grain running in a different direction. And in the center of it, almost invisible in the dim light, was a keyhole. There was no doorknob, just a dark, small keyhole. My heart started to beat a little faster. I remembered the second key, the one for the heart of the house. I went back downstairs to my backpack and fumbled for the small envelope. Maya was sitting at the dusty kitchen table, her head in her hands. She didn't look up as I passed. I took the second key out. It was smaller than the front door key, and stranger. It was made of a lighter metal, almost silver, with an intricate floral design at the top. I went back up to the attic, my flashlight beam cutting a wobbly path through the darkness. I stood in front of the strange section of wall and pushed the key into the lock. It slid in perfectly. I turned it. There was a soft click, then another. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the entire section of wall swung inward without a sound. It wasn't a door. It was a hidden panel, perfectly balanced on hidden hinges. Behind it was not a closet or a storage space, but a small, windowless room. The air that flowed out was different. It wasn't musty and dead. It was dry and clean, smelling of paper and cedar. My flashlight beam fell on a small wooden desk, a comfortable-looking reading chair, and floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with books. On the desk was a heavy, dark green metal box, like an old military footlocker, but smaller. It was closed with two simple latches. This was it. This was the heart of the house. I stepped inside, the floorboards solid and silent beneath my feet. This room had been built to last. It had been built to hide something. I ran my hand over the cool metal of the box, my mind racing. What could be so important that it needed to be hidden away in a secret room in a forgotten farmhouse in the middle of nowhere? I felt a strange mix of terror and hope. Whatever was in this box was our real inheritance, and I had a feeling it wasn't going to be simple. It was going to change everything. I called Maya up. Her footsteps were hesitant on the attic stairs. When she saw the open panel and the room behind it, her eyes widened. "What is this?" she breathed, stepping cautiously inside. She ran a finger over the spine of a book, leaving a clean streak in the thin layer of dust. For the first time since we'd arrived, the fear in her expression was replaced by a flicker of awe. We both stared at the green metal box on the desk. It felt like the only real thing in the room, a solid, heavy presence. "We should open it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I undid the two latches. They snapped open with a sharp metallic sound that echoed in the small space. I lifted the lid. The inside was lined with felt, and it was packed full. On the very top was a thick, yellowed envelope with our names on it, written in an elegant, looping script, "For Leo and Maya." Beneath it, I could see stacks of smaller envelopes, all bound with twine, and underneath those, something else. I lifted the top envelope. It was unsealed. Inside were several pages of heavy, cream-colored paper, filled with the same cursive handwriting. I pulled out the first page and started to read aloud, my voice shaky in the silent room. "My dearest Leo and Maya, if you are reading this, then it means I am gone, and it means you have found your way home. I am so sorry. Those are the first words I need to say. I know you must have grown up thinking I abandoned you, thinking I didn't love you. Nothing could be further from the truth. Every choice I made to protect you." Maya sat down on the edge of the reading chair, her arms wrapped around herself. I kept reading. The letter went on to explain everything. Our father, a man we'd never known, hadn't just left our mother. He had been a dangerous man, involved with dangerous people. When he died, he left behind a massive debt to a criminal syndicate, a debt they fully intended to collect from his family. Our mother had tried to run, to hide with us, but they found her. Her death, the letter explained, wasn't an accident. Grandma Elara knew they would come for us next. She couldn't go to the police. The syndicate had connections everywhere. Her only option was to make us disappear. She gave us up to the state, severing all legal ties, making us anonymous wards of the system, hiding us in plain sight where no one would think to look for the grandchildren of a woman living on a secluded farm. It was the hardest thing she ever did. She wrote that she died a little every day, knowing we were in an orphanage, growing up without her. The letter was long, filled with details that made my head spin. She had spent the last decade of her life preparing for our return. This farm, this house, it wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. She had paid it off completely. The property taxes Ms. Albright mentioned weren't from the county. They were a fiction, a fabrication created by the developers, Stone Ridge Estates. And then came the final, gut-wrenching reveal. Stone Ridge Estates was a front company for the same syndicate our father had been indebted to. The man who had been sending generous offers for the land was the same man who had been hunting our family for years. He didn't want the land. He wanted what was buried on it. Our father had hidden something valuable for the syndicate on this property before he died, something they were still desperate to find. Our grandmother had never found it, but she knew it was here. By leaving us the farm, she had given us the one thing the syndicate couldn't take by force: legal ownership. They couldn't just storm the place, they had to acquire it legally. Her entire plan had been a long, desperate gamble to keep us safe until we were old enough to understand the truth and make our own choices. I finished the last page, my hands trembling. The silence in the room was thick with the weight of her words. I looked at Maya. Tears were streaming down her face, silent and steady. She wasn't crying for the grandmother we'd lost. She was crying for the one we'd never known, the one who had fought a silent, lonely war for us. I cried for the years we'd spent feeling angry and abandoned. I cried for the mother we'd lost and the truth we'd never been told. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, was a lie. But it was a lie born of a fierce, desperate love. I reached back into the box. Beneath the letters were stacks and stacks of cash, neatly bundled. 10s, 20s, 50s. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. A note on top read, "For a fresh start, use it to run, or use it to fight. The choice is yours." My grandmother had given us an escape hatch. We could take this money, disappear, and let the syndicate have the land. Or we could stay. We could honor her sacrifice. We could fight for the only home we had ever truly owned. The choice was ours. The weight of it felt heavier than the house, heavier than the whole world. I looked at Maya, her face pale in the flashlight beam. The question hung in the air between us, unspoken. What do we do now? The revelation left us shattered. We sat in that hidden room for what felt like hours, the flashlight casting long, dancing shadows on the walls as its battery began to die. The money sat on the desk between us, a silent testament to our grandmother's foresight. It was a tangible way out, a clean break. Maya was the first to speak, her voice raspy from crying. "We should take it," she said, not looking at me. "We take the money, Leo. We go somewhere far away. California, maybe. We can get a small apartment. I can finish school. You can get a job. We can be normal." I understood why she said it. The thought of it was intoxicating. A life without secrets, without threats, without the crushing weight of this dilapidated farm. A life where we weren't defined by our parents' mistakes or our grandmother's war. Just a normal life. That's all we'd ever wanted. But I looked around the small, secret room, at the books lining the shelves, at the comfortable chair where my grandmother must have sat, writing those letters, planning our future while her own was running out. Running felt like a betrayal. It felt like letting the people who destroyed our family win. "They killed Mom, Maya," I said softly. "These people, Stone Ridge Estates, they're the reason we grew up at St. Jude's. Grandma spent 10 years holding them off, protecting this place for us. If we run, what was it all for?" "It was so we could be safe," she shot back, her voice rising. "She says it right there, in the letter. She gave us a choice. She gave us the money so we could choose to be safe." She was right, but the choice felt like a test of character. My whole life I had been passive. Things happened to me. I was moved from one foster home to another. I was placed at St. Jude's. I was given a file, a case number. I had followed rules, kept my head down, and survived. But this was different. This was the first real choice I'd ever had. It wasn't about surviving anymore. It was about deciding who I was going to be. Was I the boy who ran, or the man who stood his ground? The weight of that question pressed down on me, and for a moment I felt like I was going to break under it. I felt the familiar sting of tears in my eyes, the hot lump in my throat. I was just a kid. How could I possibly fight a criminal syndicate? How could I protect my sister? The fear was a cold, physical thing, coiling in my stomach. And this is a point in the story where I have to be honest with you. I was terrified. Maybe you've been there, at a crossroads where one path is easy and safe, and the other is right, but feels impossible. It's a lonely place to be. If you're facing a choice like that right now, or if you've ever had to make one, I want you to know you're not alone. Let me know in the comments about a time you had to choose the harder path. Your stories matter. They remind us that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. Now, let's get back to that dusty attic room. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of old paper and cedar. I looked at the money, then I looked at my sister. The fear was still there, but something else was rising to meet it, a slow-burning anger. An anger for my mother's stolen life, for my grandmother's lonely sacrifice, for our stolen childhood. Running meant we would carry this fear with us for the rest of our lives, always looking over our shoulders. Staying meant facing it, right here, right now. It meant taking a stand on the one piece of ground that was truly ours. "We're not running," I said, and the words, once spoken, felt solid and true. "This is our home, Maya. Grandma Elara didn't save it for us so we could sell it to the people who took everything from her." Maya stared at me, her expression a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Leo, we can't win. They're dangerous." "Maybe we can't," I admitted, "but we have to try." Grandma left us more than just money. She left us a story. She left us the truth. And she left us this house. We have to honor that. I picked up the thick stack of letters. There were dozens of them, chronicling her decade-long fight. In one of them, she mentioned a local lawyer, a man named Benjamin Carter, the son of an old friend, who had discreetly helped her with legal matters over the years. She said he was the only person in Havenwood she trusted. That was our starting point. We weren't entirely alone. The choice was made. The terror was still there, but now it had a purpose. It was fuel. We spent the rest of the night reading our grandmother's letters, one by one. With each page, the woman I barely remembered came into focus. She was brilliant and fierce, and she had loved us with a strength that reached across years and even beyond death itself. By morning, the flashlight had died, but the first rays of sun were filtering through the grimy attic window. We weren't just two scared orphans in a broken-down house anymore. We were the last of the Haywards, and we were home, and we were going to fight. The next morning, we made a plan. The first step was to find Benjamin Carter. We hid the metal box and its contents back in the secret room, and for the first time, locking that hidden door felt like securing our future, not just hiding a secret. We used some of the cash to buy groceries at the town's general store. The woman behind the counter, a kindly lady with flour on her apron, introduced herself as Carol. She remembered our grandmother. "Elada was a tough woman," she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Kept to herself, but she had a spine of steel. It's good to see her family back in that house." Her simple words were a balm. We weren't invisible here. We were connected to a legacy. We asked her for directions to Benjamin Carter's law office. It was a small, unassuming office on Main Street above the bakery. The man himself was older, with a kind, weary face and sharp, intelligent eyes. When I introduced myself and Maya and mentioned Ilara Hayward, his entire demeanor changed. He ushered us into his office and closed the door. "I was wondering when you'd arrive," he said, his voice low. "Your grandmother was a remarkable person. She told me you might come one day." We spent 2 hours in his office, laying out the entire story, showing him the letter that explained everything. He listened patiently, nodding, his expression growing more serious with every detail. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Stone Ridge Estates has been a thorn in this community's side for years," he said. "They use predatory tactics, trying to buy up all the old family farms to build some soulless, gated community. We've fought them on zoning, on environmental impact, but they have deep pockets. I always suspected there was something more to their obsession with your grandmother's property." He looked at the fabricated tax bill I showed him. "This is fraud. It's a clumsy, arrogant attempt at intimidation. We can fight this." For the first time, a genuine sliver of hope cut through my fear. We had an ally, a professional, just like Ms. Albright, but this one was on our side, armed with the law. Ben Carter laid out a strategy. First, we would file a formal complaint against Stone Ridge for fraudulent claims and harassment. Second, we would use some of our grandmother's money to pay off the actual property taxes, which were much less than the fabricated bill, but still overdue. This would secure our legal standing. Third, and this was the hardest part, we would move into the house and start fixing it up. We had to show the town and Stone Ridge that we were here to stay. The next few weeks were a blur of hard work. We transferred the cash into a bank account, a process that was both terrifying and empowering. We paid the taxes at the county clerk's office. We bought tools, paint, and supplies, and we started to reclaim the house from years of neglect. We scrubbed floors, patched walls, and pulled weeds until our hands were raw and our muscles ached. Every small act of repair felt like an act of defiance. We were literally and figuratively rebuilding our home. Maya, who had been so desperate to run, found a surprising strength. She had a knack for it, a steady hand for painting, an eye for what needed to be done. We worked side by side, often in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the silence of a shared purpose. We were a team. One evening, as we were sitting on the newly repaired porch, watching the fireflies begin to dot the twilight, a sleek black car pulled up our long driveway. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was smooth, polished, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Leo Hayward?" he asked. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm Mark Corrigan from Stone Ridge Estates. I just wanted to personally welcome you to the neighborhood and reiterate our very generous offer for this property. I stood up, planting my feet firmly on the wooden planks of the porch. "It's not for sale," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. His smile tightened. "Look, son, this is a lot of land for a kid to handle. The house is a wreck. Take the money. It's a life-changing amount. Go have a life." His tone was condescending, a thin veneer of civility over a core of menace. "We're already having a life," Maya said, her voice clear and strong from beside me. "Right here." Corrigan's eyes flickered between us. The mask dropped for a second, and I saw a flash of cold, reptilian anger. He knew we knew. He knew the game was changing. He got back in his car without another word and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. The confrontation left us shaken, but also strangely exhilarated. We had faced the monster, and we hadn't backed down. That night, I found my grandmother's old toolkit in the barn. Inside, under a rusty wrench, was a small, folded piece of paper. It was a diagram of the property, with a section of the north pasture circled in red ink. Next to it, she had written a single word: dandelion. It was another piece of the puzzle. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The diagram was a new mystery, a new layer to our grandmother's elaborate plan. The north pasture was a rolling, overgrown field, bordered by a dense line of ancient oak trees. The next day, Maya and I walked the area marked on the map. It looked like any other part of the farm, covered in tall grass and wildflowers. We spent hours searching, not even sure what we were looking for. The word dandelion was the only clue. Was it a code word? A location marker? As the sun began to set, Maya, frustrated, kicked at a clump of dirt near the base of the largest oak tree. A piece of metal, dull and dark, was dislodged. We knelt down and started digging with our hands. A few inches below the surface was a small, flat metal plate, almost completely consumed by rust. In the center was a faint, barely legible engraving of a flower, a dandelion. Beneath the plate was a hollow space. Reaching inside, my fingers brushed against a small, leather-bound book. It was a ledger. I opened it. The pages were filled with my father's handwriting, detailing years of transactions, names, dates, and account numbers. It was a complete record of the syndicate's money laundering operations. This was it. This was what they were so desperate to find. This was the leverage my father had hidden and the weapon my grandmother had left for us. Holding that ledger felt like holding a lit stick of dynamite. This was infinitely more dangerous than a property dispute. This was evidence that could dismantle a criminal organization and get us killed in the process. We took it straight to Ben Carter. When he saw it, he turned pale. He closed the blinds of his office, even though it was already dark outside. "This changes everything," he said, his voice a low, serious whisper. "This isn't just about your farm anymore. This is major. We have to be smart about this. We can't just walk into the local police station." He explained that the syndicate's influence could easily reach into local law enforcement. Our only safe move was to go federal. He had a contact at the FBI, an old law school friend he trusted implicitly. The decision to hand over the ledger was terrifying. It meant escalating the conflict to a level we couldn't control. But it was also our only real path to freedom. Keeping it meant we would be hunted forever. Using it meant we could finally end the threat that had shadowed our family for decades. We agreed. Ben made the call. The next few days were the most tense of my life. We stayed on the farm, trying to act as normal as possible. But every passing car on the road made us jump. The threat was no longer a faceless corporation. It was a real and present danger. Then, one evening, 2 plain, dark sedans rolled up our driveway. Men in suits and windbreakers got out, badges clipped to their belts. They were FBI agents. They were calm, professional, and they treated us not like kids, but like crucial witnesses. They interviewed us for hours, going over every detail of our story, of the letters, of the ledger. They secured the ledger and told us we were now under their protection. They also told us that Mark Corrigan and several of his associates had been taken into custody. The investigation was just beginning, but the syndicate's Havenwood operation had been decapitated. As they left, the lead agent, a woman with kind but tired eyes, turned to me. "Your grandmother was a very brave woman," she said. "She built a fortress for you, and she left you the ammunition to win the war. You did the right thing." When their cars were gone, a profound silence settled over the farm. It was a different kind of silence than before. It wasn't empty or lonely. It was peaceful. The war was over. We had won. In the months that followed, life began to find a new rhythm. The legal case against Stone Ridge Estates and its parent syndicate unfolded in the news, a distant echo of the storm we had weathered. With the threat gone, we could finally focus on the future. We used the rest of our grandmother's money not for an escape, but for an investment in our home. We hired a local contractor to fix the roof and the sagging porch. We bought a used pickup truck. I got a part-time job at the local hardware store, and Maya enrolled in the regional high school, where she made friends for the first time in her life. The house slowly transformed. The peeling paint was replaced with a fresh coat of white. The broken shutter was fixed. We planted a garden in the same spot our grandmother used to have hers, using the old seed packets we found in the barn. The work was hard, but it was honest work, and every day we could see the tangible results of our efforts. We were not just living in the house, we were bringing it back to life, and in turn, it was bringing us back to life. The community of Havenwood, which had at first watched us with cautious curiosity, began to embrace us. Carol from the general store would drop off extra baked goods. Our neighbor, an old farmer named George, taught me how to use the ancient tractor in our barn and helped me plow a small section of the north pasture. People shared stories about our grandmother, painting a picture of a woman who was private and fierce, but also kind and deeply respected. We learned that she had quietly helped many people in town over the years, never asking for anything in return. We weren't just the Hayward orphans anymore. We were Ilara's grandchildren. We belonged. One cool autumn evening, Maya and I were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink. The farm was quiet, the air crisp with the promise of winter. In a year, we had gone from being wards of the state to homeowners, from being victims of our family's past to the masters of our own future. We had faced down a criminal syndicate and won. It all still felt a little surreal. "Do you ever miss it?" Maya asked suddenly. "The city? St. Jude's?" I thought about it for a moment. I thought about the gray hallways, the ticking clock, the constant feeling of being a temporary resident in my own life. "No," I said honestly. "I don't miss any of it. I wish we could have known her. I wish we could thank her." Maya nodded, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I think we are," she said softly, "by being here, by being happy." And she was right. This farm was never just about the land or the house. It was about a promise. It was about a grandmother's belief that her grandchildren deserved a place to call home, a place to be safe, a place to put down roots. An inheritance isn't always about what you're given. It's about what you choose to do with it. We were given a broken-down house and a dangerous secret. We could have chosen to run, but we chose to stay, to fight, to build. And in doing so, we found something far more valuable than money or land. We found ourselves. We found a home, not in the wooden frame of the house, but in the life we were building within it, and in the quiet strength we found in each other. The past will always be a part of our story, a shadow that reminds us of how far we've come. But it no longer defines us. Our future is a blank page, an open field waiting to be planted. And for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of what comes next. I'm ready for it. I'm home. This journey taught me that home isn't a place you're given. It's a place you make. It's a choice you make every day to show up, to do the work, to care for the people and the patch of ground that you're responsible for. It's about honoring the sacrifices of those who came before you by living a life worthy of their legacy. We all inherit something. Sometimes it's a house, sometimes it's a name, and sometimes it's just a story, a wound, or a quiet strength we didn't even know we had. The question is, what do we do with it? How do we turn the inheritance of our past into the foundation of our future? I want to thank you for listening to my story today. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your own sense of home or untangle the secrets of your family's past, please consider subscribing to this channel. This is a community for people who understand that the most important stories are the ones we have to fight to reclaim. Share your own story in the comments below. I read every one of them. Your story matters. And remember, no matter how broken the house may seem, you always have the power to rebuild. You just have to be brave enough to pick up the tools and start.